Bon, bien, on va commencer. Bonjour, bienvenue à la séance de mars des lundis numériques. Aujourd'hui, nous accueillons Stefan Rohde-Enslin du service des musées d'État de Berlin, le Staatliche Museum zu Berlin, département de la Fondation du patrimoine culturel prussien, la Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz. Il est coordinateur bénévole de la plateforme Museum Digital, qui sera le sujet des lundis numériques du mois de mars. Il est accompagné de Joshua Enslin de la Freies Deutsches Hochstift Goethe-Museum à Francfort-sur-le-Main, donc le musée Goethe de l'Université libre allemande. Anne Klamt, la directrice de recherche et responsable des humanités numériques au Deutsches Forum für Kunstgeschichte à Paris, devrait nous rejoindre, animer la séance avec moi. Nous présenterons donc Museum Digital, une plateforme mettant en ligne les collections de nombreux musées allemands qui centralise les informations, conseille les institutions sur leurs choix numériques et leurs données, et publie également des vocabulaires contrôlés en SCOS. Je vous rappelle que l'intervention se déroulera en anglais. Elle durera environ 45 minutes, à l'issue de laquelle vous pourrez répondre aux questions du public si vous le souhaitez. Vous pouvez donc poser des questions sur l'outil de questions et réponses Q&R du webinaire. Et maintenant, je vais répéter et continuer cette introduction en anglais. Good afternoon and welcome to this session of the Lundi Numérique. We are glad to host today Stefan Rohde-Enslin of the Berlin State Museums Department of the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation and coordinator volunteer for Museum Digital, and Joshua Enslin of the Goethe Museum of the German Free University in Frankfurt upon Main, and chief developer of Museum Digital. Stefan and Joshua will present us the Museum Digital platform, which publish many German museums collections. Museum Digital centralize also information and advise these institutions about their data and digital developments. I leave the floor to Stefan Rohde-Enslin and Joshua Enslin for roughly 45 minutes to 1 hour. The presentation will be followed by questions to our guests, and the audience can write its questions through the Q&A tool or in holding the hand in the tool just next. Stefan und Joshua, Sie sind dran.
Danke. I try to share my screen. Plum, plum, plum. Is it correct?
Yes, so far we still have the column listing all the different slides. Yeah, it's full screen now. Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah, wonderful. So what we are going to present is Museum Digital. But what is Museum Digital? If you see this slide, please don't expect that we exist since 1872. But the work we do is a work which is as old. This is just a collection of questions. We try to, just to emphasize that, we try to show a lot of things about Museum Digital. Well, this Museum Digital is an initiative, and it started its work in January 29, 2009 in a small museum in Bitterfeld. The Regional Museum Association of Saxony-Anhalt, which is one of the federal states we have in Germany, they called me and asked, please help. They want to do something with digitization. And I went there, and then with 6 museums, we started to form a working group on digitization in the Museum Association. The situation in Germany is, I guess, of course, I do not know really, a bit different from France. So I try to show, to have with a short, brief digression, I try to show the museum landscape we have. According to Constitution in Germany, culture and education is with federal states. It's not with central government. Do you still hear me? Yeah?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so it's not with central government. That means central government supports and finances only very few museums. We don't have a Ministry of Culture. We have 16 of them. And the federal states, they have their state museums. It's a few. Below that level, we have districts. And the districts have their museums, or the museums they finance and support. So it's already much more. And then we have about 12,000 municipalities, and most museums are rooted in the municipalities. So we have a very diverse landscape for museums. Most museums are based in the municipalities. Some are large, some are small, some are in between, some are private, some are public, and a lot of museums are both at the same time. It's a publicly supported private initiative. We have specialized museums, usually they are bigger, concentrating on life and work of one or two artists, for example. And we have generalists, that is the majority. They have a bit of everything, and the director often does not really know what he has, not for all of the objects. We have museums with full-time employees, and a lot of museums are run on voluntary base. What they all have in common, the large ones and the small ones, is that they are organized in regional associations. So the regional associations, which is according to or follows the federal state diversion, that is the main basis. They have large and small limited access to IT resources. They have limited knowledge of IT processes. No one, who wants to become a museum director choose not to study informatics, usually. And there is a growing awareness that they have to be visible in the digital realm. Meanwhile, nearly all of them have this feeling and this awareness. So as I said, we started with 6 museums in that small town of Bitterfeld in 2009, and we formulated an aim for the work of the working group. The aim was to create a software system that is open to all museums, regardless of their focus or size, that allows them to easily and effectively gain visibility on the internet through publication of their objects. So our aim is to popularize the museums in the internet, and we use the objects for it. And such an aim has consequences. If we want all museums to participate, we have to make it as free of costs as possible. And up to now, so far, and we think this will be for a very long time, it is really free of any costs for the museums, the use of the software. The software has to be very easy to use. I'm sure it is. The software has to be highly adjustable, because there are the specialized museums, they have different needs. The software is developed in permanent dialogue with the participating museums. That is very important. Everything is web-based and independent of this computer settings that are available in the museum. The focus is on feeding search engines and not on creating a museum portal. We became a museum portal by accident, or we are one, but that is not our focus. Our main customer is the robot of Google. So, Joshua.
Yeah, I'll now go through some features and how we talked to museums, we saw what needed to be done, and then did it. Yeah, so pretty much from the start, from when we first set up an input interface where people could enter their object data, people started using it for inventorization too. So in the beginning, it was only about publishing, but people did actually use it for inventory purposes. And then we added all the fields that are necessary for inventorization. So we added fields like loan management. We added fields like insurance values, for example. So because we saw that that the use case museums actually had in mind was much larger than we had expected, we expanded our realm. Yeah. And similarly, in the beginning, it was only about objects, but a lot of people, and what we do in a museum is telling stories based on objects. So we often got the request if we didn't have anything for telling stories, and we set up a new tool for thematic portals and digital exhibitions. So in the beginning, it really was thematic portals, meaning it looks kind of like the Wikipedia. Stefan will disagree, but you have ordered entries in a consecutive narrative. Now the alternative is really just digital exhibitions in a storytelling mode, which a lot of museums want. Yeah. We noticed it became quite hard to search things. In the very beginning, we didn't have controlled vocabularies, but then we introduced them, meaning all museums use one set of keywords. All museums use one set of places so that the system knows if somebody says Berlin and the other person says Berlin, they mean the same thing. And so that the system can search by that. By controlling those vocabularies, we can also enrich the data. So we can say that, I think it's Spanish where it's Berlino, but Berlin in a different language is Berlino. Yeah. Yes, we'll talk more about the controlled vocabularies later. And I already hinted at it. In 2014, Hungarian colleagues asked us if they couldn't set up a Hungarian Museum Digital too. We said, sure. So the software needed to be translated. So we made all these strings, for example, object name. We made those multilingual, and we also added a lot of options for translating object information. So those two levels, and then the controlled vocabularies, we also made those multilingual. What I just said, Berlino, but also the object, as the object title is Buch in German. You can say it's book in English. Yes. Stefan?
Yeah.
Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. It's not showing up yet. Now it does. Yeah. the next point is that we increasingly expand the list of file formats you can attach to an object. So in the beginning, an object representation really was just one image. And then people came and said, we have a book which has 1,000 images. Can't we upload those? And then we added an option to upload 1,000 images, or if you want to, 10,000 for one object. And then people came and said, but my object is a movie, like short films from, in Potsdam, there's a film museum, and their objects are movies, or short films. So we added an option to upload videos. Now in the last few years, there's a move to digitizing objects in 3D. And so we added 3D files that you can upload to properly represent the object. Yes.
Next slide is there.
Yeah, it's coming, I guess.
Or I can give you the keywords, and you tell the story. Keyboard navigation.
Yeah. I hope that everybody can directly see it, and it's a problem with my computer, even if I fear it's not. So, well, keyboard navigation. It's about being accessible to anybody and being accessible in ways, which means accessibility for example, blind people. But on the other hand, also making it very efficient for power users. And that means adding a keyboard navigation. So yes, we do have that. Then at one point we saw that there's now an API, a programming interface for voice control of browsers. So we tried it out, but voice control is still experimental. And similarly, there's this move to using artificial intelligence for solving problems pretty much anywhere, but also in museums these days. And so we tried it out. It works quite well. If you have an image, we can use image recognition to try to extract tags for the object. Yeah. And Stefan, you can't be heard. I see that you're talking. Yes, exports. A much more mundane thing is that, of course, people want to have their data, not just in the system, but also in a format that's easy to back up. That's why we added export options, and in two forms. One is just a generic XML for backing up mainly, and the other, or for moving to a different system also. And then there's Lido, which is a standard exchange format used by, I guess, most museums in Europe, but especially in Germany, it's strong, and you can configure which fields you want to export, and then which format, a format that's commonly understood, or a format that can, because Lido is only for public data, that you can also use for example, insurance values. On the other hand, all published data is accessible in a machine-readable form. So if you take the URL of an object and you just enter and output equals JSON, you see a JSON, a machine-readable representation of the same data that's published for the objects. And the same goes for searches. You just enter and output equals JSON, and you see the search information. Meaning that it's very easy for external programmers to work with the data. We also don't require any authentication for that. We see Museum Digital as infrastructure as well. Yeah. And Then we had the problem that Museum Digital originally is regional, which was the next few slides, but people wanted a national portal. And starting with the Hungarians, we thought we could also do a global portal. So we built a tool to aggregate different regional instances into subordinate ones. So from Rhineland-Palatinate and Saxony-Anhalt, it becomes Germany. From Rhineland-Palatinate and Saxony-Anhalt and Baranya, it becomes global. The same thing can be used to do thematical portals. So what you see at the bottom, the example, is Gedenkstätten, which is memorial institutions. You could do one for art museums or for art museums of a certain period. We're pretty much free now with that tool to aggregate museums or aggregate collections based on a criteria we set. Yes.
The connections are slow. Tool for imports and tool for preparation.
Yeah. I guess I have different slides. I'll continue with mine. Essentially, those are just some examples of features, but I think it shows the general process of how we develop things. One thing is, if we see a need, so if people do inventorization work with the tool, then we extend it to meet that need properly. If people have a good idea, we do it. And if there's a general current, like artificial intelligence, we also just play around a bit sometimes and see if we can use it. And often, even just playing around a bit leads to pretty nice results. And I had overlooked that slide. Of course, you can bring your data to Museum Digital by just entering it in the input interface, but we also built an import tool, or rather two. One import tool that actually does the imports, and another one with which museums can prepare their import data in a way that's very easy for the actual import script to consume, so that we don't have any work anymore for doing the importing. We just upload it, press a button, it's there. If they have prepared the data. Otherwise, if they come with custom forms, it may be quite some work. Yes. Stefan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I switched.
Yeah, you switched, and the slide is coming, I guess. So what I said before, we develop things in constant dialogue with the museums and in dialogue with the technology as it's developing. And as Stefan said before, the base technology is web browsers. What can web browsers do? If the web expands, we can do more, or if the underlying, if there's more frameworks for artificial intelligence, for example, available, we can also try to use those. The aim is always to improve data quality and to make it very easy for a very diverse set of people to collect and generate rich data. Yes, of course, it's a very diverse set, so the tools need to work for each of those different people.
Now I have the slide other features, support for improving object data. It's not
okay.
appearing.
Yeah, it's a bit sluggish, I guess. So the next slide will be, I hope, other features, and that just lists some other things. Many I named already, so you can enter loans, you can enter literature entries, you can enter exhibitions, and you can document them by themselves, but you can also link them with objects. But on the other hand, there's one really important line there, which is museum directors can create as many user accounts as necessary, meaning the museum director or somebody with a user role, museum director, has full control also of their user management. Oftentimes in Germany, I guess in France it's the same, museums don't have control of their IT. It's the communal or the municipal IT department that controls which user accounts exist, for example. And then you spend a week into an internship to request for an account, or something like that. With Museum Digital, the director can just create that account, done. So it's a quite flat hierarchy in terms of user management. Object groups can be grouped into different levels, into different categories. So object groups, which is just any generic form of object group, and collections. Collections is something museums interpret differently. Most of the time, it's the organizational structure of the museum itself. So in the museum I work at, we have a manuscript collection and an arts collection, and those two are the main collections together with the library. It follows a administrative structure. And sure, there are batch editing functions too. Yeah. And I overlooked the important thing at the bottom. Most functions can be switched off. So that's again that point. Make the software understandable to different types of users. If somebody wants to use complicated but also sophisticated data structures, they can. If they just want a free text field, that's also possible. So that it will be useful for specialists, but it will also be useful for a volunteer-run museum of 2 volunteers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we see the screen most simple. The next is some functions. They are added below. And the next is even more functions. They're also on top. You can get your literature management or exhibition management and all those functions. But as you see, with the most simple example, they can be switched off if you don't need them. So Joshua, I hope you are now on the right screen to understand.
I'm still at the other features, but the next 3 slides just show different configurations. So the users themselves can say, I want this tab, I want the specialized tab for provenance research, for example, or I want the tab for exhibition management. But users who don't care about provenance research or who don't care about exhibitions can disable that so that the interface is very simple for them. So those are the next 3 slides.
Yeah, yeah. Now we go to structure.
Yes. I hinted at that already. The structure of Museum Digital is regional, first of all. All museums enter into or collect their data, keep the canonical version of their data in a regional instance. So in Germany, it's going by state. So there's one for the state of Hessen. There's one for the state of Rhineland-Palatinate. There's one for the state of Berlin. Those regional instances of Museum Digital can be aggregated into larger ones, meaning Germany, or yet larger ones, meaning global, but they are all held together by the controlled vocabularies. So everybody uses the same. And that goes over language barriers as well. So German museums use the same controlled vocabularies as Hungarian museums. Still seeing the features slide.
Now better.
Mm-mm.
So it's regional instance to ND NODAC graphic on top.
Okay, it's not moving.
How is it for you, Michelle? Is it do you see my slides? Are they changing, or is it a general problem?
Non, tout à fait, ça marche.
Ça marche.
Yeah.
Ah, hello, Anna.
Bonjour.
Hello.
Yeah.
No, Stefan, I can't see your slides, but obviously for everybody it's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, then I'll just
structure with regional instance and NODAC on top.
Okay. All right. So each regional instance has a regional administrator, say caretakers. We had a bit of fun with translating that. Each one has an administrator, and those administrators talk to the museums, introduce them to the use of the software, and to the basic rules they need to follow if they want the basic concepts as well, if they want to use the software, and they organize increasingly workshops. Those regional administrators meet once a month and discuss how the project is developing. And okay, we write a lot, we have a mailing list, and we coordinate a lot. Yes. So for everybody to use the same controlled vocabularies, we of course need to control them. And we need to control them means that we also change what's visible on a museum's visibly linked to museum's objects. Meaning if one museum says, Germany, we have this example always, Frankfurt, because there's two large German cities called Frankfurt, one am Main and one an der Oder. So if one museum says it's Frankfurt and the other one says it's also Frankfurt, but a different one, we would have a problem. So there's a team of editors for NODAC, our tool for controlling the controlled vocabularies. And the museums need to agree that those editors can come and change the name. So the object entry will say it's linked to Frankfurt an der Oder, not just Frankfurt. Yeah. Next up is basic rules. I hope everybody sees it. And this is essentially the point where we use controlled vocabularies. We use controlled vocabularies for 4 types of information, meaning actors, places, times, and tags or keywords. Actors, places, and times can be grouped. So in a lot of traditional museum databases, and also in the way most people just learn in their disciplines, you date an object. But dating an object is always the problem, because what do you date? Do you date its sale, or do you date its creation? Do you date the time when a painting was painted, or do you date when the frame was made for the painting? To make that more clear, the standard, much of the data structure at Museum Digitale is based on Lido, has that concept of events, meaning who did what, when, and where. And those are exactly those 3: actors, places, times. So those are the ones we control. And the 4th one is keywords. I think those are quite clear.
I go to next slide.
Because, yeah, I'm at the one after Eugène Delacroix.
Yeah.
I hope I pronounced that right. Yeah. So there's quite a lot of rules for how to enter those entries, because the NODAC editors control them and improve them, but already when adding them, museums should best follow the rules immediately, and then we have less work in controlling them. One that always comes up is unknown. It's an unknown place. For computer, an unknown place in Oceania would be the same as an unknown place in Offenbach, my hometown. So yeah, for computer, there's only one unknown, and there's only one unknown actor or unknown artist, which at least in German art history, a lot of people used to indicate, okay, we've checked and we really couldn't find one. But at Museum Digitale, we say there is no unknown. Unknown doesn't exist. Just leave it empty if you don't know. And similarly, a lot of people use a diverse set of indicators to say that something is just likely, but not true. So maybe Berlin, question mark Berlin. We've seen them all. So instead of having those different indicators there, which make it impossible to control the term. So I couldn't search for Berlin question mark and Berlin. Or a computer wouldn't know that those two are the same term. Instead, we said, okay, we have 2 different stati for places and actors and times within an event, which is, it can be certain or it can be uncertain. If somebody enters Berlin question mark, it automatically gets corrected to Berlin, but the entry is linked as uncertain with that tilde. Last but not least, search engines are important and text is important. So we require museums to enter at least 25 characters of an object description before publishing the object, or if they use the input interface, before even entering the object. Participation, yes. So how do museums actually get started with using Museum Digitale? it's quite easy. They send us a mail, or they send the regional administrator mail if there is one. And then they just need to send some basic information about the museum, meaning an image or an image and a short description of the place and an address. After that, they can get an introduction, or they can just read the handbook, but they already have access. I would go on a bit faster because I see the time is progressing.
Shall I go on?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
users.
Usage. People use it for inventorizing more and more, but of course, publishing is still the mainstay of Museum Digital. So there's this move towards doing both at the same time, inventorizing, but at the same time already inventorizing object data in a way so that it can be easily published, not using abbreviations, but spelling out things, for example.
Yeah.
And Museum Digital tries to support that move very much, also technically. Yeah, but next slide. How do museums get started, or where do they come from? Often they already have a collection management system and just want to publish their data. Those are the yellow ones up there. Sometimes they want to use MD. They already have a collection management system, but they want to use Museum Digital as a replacement. So they want to switch to Museum Digital. Then we do import the data once. After that, they enter it manually. They just simply don't have one. In that case, they get access and enter the data by hand. Some really only want to use Museum Digital for inventorizing. Then they also get an account and enter the data. Something, a bit of a funny case, a lot of museums get inventorization software from their municipality or from the federal state. So they get a software product and they see, we don't like it, so they don't use it. And they continue on paper or in Excel, something like that. Yeah, and yet another thing, a lot of museums just simply have many collection management systems, some paper-based. One, Stefan still remembers which museum it was, had 20 databases all developed by hand by the museum director. So there's a very diverse situation. And in those situations, we also try to import the data as best as we can. If it's just a little bit of data and very different formats, people will just enter it by hand.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just went on.
Yeah.
Interest.
Yeah. It just shows, and I would speed up a bit. So it just shows that people use very different forms. A collection management system is also index cards and entry lists. So it's the most basic form of a collection management system, and it's not digital. It isn't as easily searchable, but people still use it. And oftentimes people use all the different forms in the same museum.
Yeah, so I'm on the screen. So far we imported everything, every form.
Yeah. And we did. Yeah. So
maybe we simply skip this. Yeah.
Yes.
Now there is the XML tool.
Yeah. CSV XML tool is the tool I hinted at previously when talking about imports. So importing can be done based on formats the museums themselves don't understand, then they can't be helped, and I end up importing it. So if they already have a collection management system which has a custom export format, for example. But a lot of museums keep their object data in Excel, or their collection management system has an Excel export. And in that case, we have a tool that checks that Excel file museums want to import and checks if it meets our data structures and if it meets the requirements. If it does, it says, okay, you can convert it into an import package and we can very easily import it without any further work for us. So we developed a tool to enable museums to make importing easy for us, but also in a way that for them, that they can be sure that the data is represented correctly. If not, it's always a negotiation of which field in the export format of the museum's collection management system fits to which field in Museum Digital.
Okay, next one is input.
Yeah, and the alternative to importing is just entering the data yourself. So there we always give hints at how to use things, how to use a field, how long it should be. You see it on next to the field, input fields. There's those question mark symbols. If you hover over them, you get a descriptive tooltip. Or at the bottom right, you can also see a marker in which it says this is a required field, and you've entered 0 out of 30 out of 300 characters that you can enter into this field. Then there's different tools that help you with a quicker or an improved data entry. So an option for repeating the last entry, and a lot more will come at the very end. But I would continue. Also, beyond the next slide just shows that you can also enter the different languages and can adjust the tabs on the object page.
Yeah, data improvement.
Yes, data improvement. So even if the data is imported, often it does need to be improved because there's problems. If it has been just entered using the input interface, there's a lot of checks against entering overly short or incomplete data, but museums still constantly improve their data. And Stefan will talk a lot more about it, but some very common problems are that there's just no description, or that the description uses jargon very much and abbreviations very much, so that most people can't understand the description. A common problem in Germany especially is that there's very different definitions of what a title is and what a name is and what a Bezeichnung is. Kind of hard to translate to English. A type essentially of an object is. So art museums have a very different idea of that from archaeological museums, for example. Then there's a problem simply with ugly images, spelling mistakes. So very mundane things, but especially when importing information, almost no almost no collection management system has a really good bibliographic module. So literature entries are oftentimes a mess. And museums later on have the opportunity with literature entries, especially they often don't do, but they have the opportunity to correct the data later on. In the case of missing descriptions, they need to if they want to publish the data using Museum Digitale. Before we said, I'm on the next slide now. Before we said, okay, that there's those 4 types of controlled vocabularies, and that's where the data is centrally improved and centrally adjusted to meet to fit into the structure and the not just the code structure, not just the data structure, but into the structure really as an ecosystem of Museum Digitale, and fits together with the other museums' data. I'll just give a quick overview over the enrichment tool, NODAC, and Stefan will then continue with a lot of examples of what problems we face when importing data or when museums enter data. So I'm on the first enrichment slide, and it shows, okay, very good. Then you should be able to see different dots and the input interface. What information do we gather on actors? In this case, it's about actors. So the museum just enters a name and ideally live dates. And they need to enter 10 characters of a description to save an actor if they do it using the input interface. So what the editors do afterwards is that they bring the names in order and merge duplicate entries, that they add translations. Those translations can often be fetched from Wikipedia and Wikidata. They also a common problem, not so much with actors to text, but in the reverse direction, is that they move entries between different vocabularies. So a tag, if somebody imports Paris as a tag, Paris is a bad example, Marseille as a tag, then that should always be a place, right? So they can say Marseille is a place, move it, and remember that this is a place and shall always be. And those are in quite a similar fashion. There's rewrites, which means if somebody says Marseille, comma, because they had a spelling mistake, then we can automatically correct that, or we can merge those entries, the one with a comma and the one without. We can merge them and then say, remember that this name always belongs to this actual entry. Marseille, comma, actually is always just Marseille. And then in the future, when somebody enters Marseille, comma, when somebody does the same mistake, it automatically gets corrected. Last but not least, there's an entity encoding with which we differentiate different types of actors. So mainly because we just record actors, we don't differentiate between, we don't natively differentiate between companies and people. We can store if it's a company or a person there.
Next slide.
Yes, next slide. We also link the data to different norm data sources, meaning primarily Wikidata, but also the German National Library's gemeinsame Normdatei and BNF in France. So the different national libraries central collections of controlled vocabularies.
Next slide.
Next slide. So here you can see background information, which works pretty much like Wikidata, but always requires a source. So we said Wikidata already exists, but what they have, just a knowledge graph, is a great thing to have. If we want to develop our own, sure, we can do. But for it to be actually useful, we want confirmed information. And that means one with a source in literature. So if you hover over those question mark symbols right next to an entry, you can see that within one statement, who said this information, or where is this described? And at the very bottom, there's a list of the objects where the term was used. So that's very often the most important thing, because if people enter a tag or a person that just exists twice, or that has different meanings, you want to check out the object to see which one of the meanings it actually is. If it's an actor, they didn't enter the live dates. If it was imported, the live dates weren't imported. You want to open the object to see when the object was created, so that you can see when the actor must have lived, more or less.
Yeah,
it goes, yeah, with places and with tags, it goes yet a bit more complicated, because they are put into hierarchies. If I want to search if I search for Europe, I want to also find objects from France, right? So we create this hierarchy to enable those inclusive searches. The same goes for tags. And with times are the one vocabulary where we're really up to it with controlling the entries, because times can be, much more than everything else, be autocorrected. If somebody enters 2020-07-20, we can automatically or pass that into a date and import it into the form we want, into the term we want. So the time vocabulary tries to do that. Stefan will go on with a lot of examples. Yeah. No.
Next slide is autocorrection, but I think you explained it already a lot. Now now I take over. It is more or less the fun part. It's our daily business. What data museums produce, that is what we encounter, a real world encounter. But first, I go through the 4 vocabularies we have. First, actors. Our rules are inspired by library standards in Germany. Actors, that is one rule, have to be individualized. Otherwise, they should appear or should be mentioned in object description. There is, as already said, no actor with the name unknown. And entering a new actor means you have to give 10 characters. So this is just what we imported, and you see where all these blue arrows to the left go. It's always the same guy. Or woman, I don't know. We have to check. But spelling mistakes make it very difficult to automatically match them and say this is the same person. Another problem we often encounter with actors is an abbreviation of the first name. Yeah. The system will not be we will not be able to distinguish this person from another one with the same abbreviation. everything will get confused. Another entry is verschiedene Künstler, which is something like more than one artist. This is a wonderful entry, and it really cannot be individualized. You cannot work with it. So what we observe with actor entries coming from the museums, very often there are typos. The software they have usually seems not to be a help to avoid this. There is no general rule for the way of writing Eugène Delacroix or Delacroix Eugène. Rarely information about an actor is contained in an export. Most often we only get the name. And especially among smaller museums, this unknown phenomenon is really prevalent. Specialized museums, they also have their specialized actor names. I remember there is Jena Maler, which means painter from Jena, a Greek vase painter. I think it was the red figure type of vase, ancient Greek. Yeah, so a museum director in a small village, and it was a small village, he had some paintings and he only knew the painter, paintings from modern paintings, and he only knew the painter comes from Jena, so he took Jena Maler for his, as the name of the actor, which is really confusing. Yeah. What do we observe when it comes to places? The rule is use current and not historical place names. Use full place names. That is what Joshua already mentioned, Frankfurt am Main and not Frankfurt. Use parentheses to individualize place names if necessary. Places that cannot be individualized should appear in the object description, the same as with actors. And there is no place like unknown. Okay. What we get is US zone Germany. That is right after World War II, Germany was divided and one part is meant, but this is neither real English nor real German. We get old place names. 1995, the city was remembered. So we now know that the data from the museum are older than 1995. An incomplete name, Biberach an der Riss, and that is the name of the city since 17th century, so they really should know it. Then they put GDR production. That is a wonderful place name. It's not a place name. Or they put two place names in it, plus a qualifier. This is Schule Rheinheim, means a school in Rheinheim. Yeah, but if there is more than one school in Rheinheim, this can ultimately be a keyword and not a place name. And some put the name of companies as a place name. So if, as we explained, we have this events, the event is production, and the question is, where was it produced? It's understandable that they put the name of the company, but then they have difficulties to find out who produced it. Also very common, they try to give some help. Irea in Italy, so they divide it by a comma. The real name is Irea. And this is really totally confusing. There was this change of political system in 1990. Yeah, before the city of Köthen-Anhalt, that is the real name, was in GDR. Afterwards, it was in BRD, which means West Germany or Federal Republic of Germany, which is now the name for the whole. Yeah, so they try to indicate the time by a place name. Really confusing. Many problems we have with incomplete entries, especially museums with a very local focus and focusing on local audience. They insert something like Hauptstraße, which means main street. Of course, in their world, it's the main street. It's really understandable. But if you put it to the web or into a platform together with things from other cities, they need a broader outlook, a broader look. Yeah, especially ceramic collecting museums use company names as place of production. Then smaller museums, they inventorize their books also with Museum Digitale, and these publishing companies, they very often, especially the bigger ones, put more than one place name as into the book. So they give it's the place where the company resides, but it's not the place where the object was produced. Okay, historical place names, they are a political problem, at least here in Germany. Revanchists, they always say Posen instead of Poznan. So it's also difficult for the Ethnodac editors to find places that do not exist anymore in former East Prussia, which is now Russia, in Kaliningrad or northeastern part of Poland. The former, very often small villages, they are not there anymore, and you cannot find any hints. Archaeologists, they are sometimes more or less too exact. They have south of grave 3 in layer 2 in the ruins of Troya. Yeah, so we need a third coordinate for how deep is it. If something really happened at more than one place, they have difficulties in their traditional database to put it in Museum Digitale. They simply would make 2 events out of it. That's very simple. Yeah.
Pardon me, Stefan, do you hear me?
Yeah.
We are running out of time.
Yeah, I speed up. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. With keywords, the rules are also, as you see, very simple. The main thing is use singular and be as specific as possible. Here are some examples, and it goes always into the same directions. But many museums really do not have keywords at all. They don't work with it. And again, traditional classic museum software is not helping them. And yeah, if they have more than one keyword, they often have only one field for keywords, and they put them into it. Yeah, time, that is the most funny part, but running out of time means I have to skip the time. It's just one that I want to mention, Qian long period. Yeah, that is in the middle. I think it's China. Sinologists might know what it is, but no one else. The next one, Spätklassik, which means late classic. This is from the American archaeologists. They simply captured the term from the archaeologists of old Greece. Yeah. And the last one, it's also the last one on this slide. I translated it. That is a real life entry. According to the seller, this figure was carved many, many years before. So that is a time entry. You see, everything is very confusing. Some Problems are created because of traditions. The Japanologists or Egyptologists, they work only for their community, and for them it's easy to use these strange terms like Qianlong period. The prehistorians often make arithmetic calculations, third quarter of 4th century to third. Yeah, you can see it. And again, the problem, the traditional software is not helping them. Now we come to the benefits. Joshua, shall I or will you?
We are late already, but if you could make a quick conclusion, maybe?
Yeah.
Because there are some questions asked to you.
Yeah. Joshua?
You couldn't hear me. Okay. Better you do it, and you just say a word for each slide, because I think that works.
I'm much faster. Yeah.
Yeah.
So of course, with controlled vocabulary, you can search through many museums at the same time. With the hierarchy, we can respect the things below. With controlled vocabularies, we can create timelines. We can collect and visualize things about actors. We can draw things on maps. We can have automatically translated tooltips. We can, and that is a thing which is very important, give support when entering names. People start typing and there appears a list of terms already known. Yeah, this one I skip. And we have Plausi, which I'm very proud of. The system can deduct. A painting cannot be painted after the life of the painter. So if you have the dates, you can compute the errors. This one we mentioned already. And of course, we have the translations. Because we control everything, and we have this API, it's easy to integrate into a museum's website and to give it to portals, German National Library. They simply press a button and everything is inside. Yeah, so that is, last slide, that is what we learned. Data solely created for administrative purposes should not be published. Cooperative publishing increases cooperation. Data is dynamic, they live. Portals are often static. They import once a year or only once. That should be changed. Inventorization should be done with publication in mind. That's the solution for everything. Think world, not village. That's also very important. And everyone has to have rules and writing instructions and stick to them. Yeah, are we successful? Yes, we are. We have 4,600 visitors a day about. Sustainable, there will be a need for it, for such a system in the longer run, no problem. It will be sustainable because we have the set of caretakers, working groups and museums all are working together. The museum associations and volunteers, meanwhile, founded, I don't know the English term for it. In German, we name it Verein. So an association, Museum Digital. The hosting is sponsored by the city of Berlin, which is bankrupt, but so it's paid by Bavaria. No problem. What are our next steps? Yeah, we were thinking about it, and the solution is the museums will tell us. We don't know where it goes. They will know. Yeah, that was the last slide.
I turn on my microphone. Thank you very much, Stefan and Joshua, for this very complete presentation. I had several questions, but it appeared that all the way through your speech, you have answered already, but there are some questions from my colleague Pierre Laborde, and I don't know if it has to do with Museum Digital organization, but they are very much to the point. The first question is, are there information concerning the history of pieces of art in the collections when these pieces of art enter the collections? Are this kind of data published on Museum Digital?
We have 3 ways to publish it. So a lot of times it's just in the object description. Then we have an own field for provenance research, which can't be published. So that's only internal. And then the working group for provenance research in Germany, they set up a standard that essentially is Lido events. It's essentially the same. So the object was bought by that person at that time, at that place. So it's pretty much the same. It just requires sources. And so we made it optional for museums to enable a button. It's not on by default, but they can. So that they can also attach sources to Lido events. And that way we meet that standard set by the working group Provenance Research. And that's public as well. So events are always public once the museum publishes the object at all.
Okay. So I hope this answer fulfill the curiosity of the audience. A second question is about the inventory number. Is the accession number as important in German museums as it is in France? The number of the object.
Well, Joshua, I try. Well, it's like that. An object gets into the museum, then it gets an accession number.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the inventory number. When it gets into the catalog or the database or the card file system, so when there is made a record for it, then it gets the inventory number.
Okay, and it's the information is published on Museum Digital as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need that very much.
Number.
Yeah, the inventory
number. Not the accession number. The accession number is not published, but the inventory number is.
Okay. Anna Klampt would like to speak. Anna?
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Today this is really a bit funny. Yes, first of all, I really want to thank you. I think this is a marvelous presentation, a really deep dive into a very complex and system that really, for me, is so amazing because it was really built up from bottom up. And I think this is something that is then I arrived in France 2 years ago. For me, it was not that clear that this bottom-up processes are really kind of specific for some countries and for some others not. And my feeling is that for French people, this is really interesting and very different. And even I wonder how this really all works out. It's a bit amazing. This is pretty cool. And for me, it was really because we are today here virtually in Paris in a very research institute. I wonder really, is this a way to open up all these tiny and huge museums and all this almost forgotten treasures to the researchers? Because when I look at your graphical user interface, it seems to me very much an approach that is is attractive to researchers, really, because you can really work through vocabularies, you really can follow along the graphs that are now offered. And so do you have any response? Do you can estimate how much this is really in the world of researchers, or still a very collection specific museum thing?
No, it's, especially during the last weeks, the number of people asking for using Museum Digitale as a research tool is really increasing. For example, there is a group who is working on Turkica, which is the Western European armies invaded the Osmanian, or otherwise the Osmanian Empire invaded Europe. So they fought, and from the war, things were brought home, 1700 something, and they are still in the museums. So there is a group of different museums, and they want to make a platform for it, and then use this platform as a tool among themselves and also with other researchers for research. In the management part of Museum Digitale, each museum can create a type of account which is called visiting scientist. He will be able to see also all the hidden information, which is not made public, and but he cannot change anything. And then we have, for example, a field which is named detailed description, which can be turned on and off. So if a museum is exporting its objects to a specialized portal, it can turn this special description on, and it will appear there differently from the general Museum Digitale. So we consider it more and more, and it's really growing, this need for it. Yeah. The last thing we are still the latest question, but we are still a bit hesitant, is about citizen science. Yeah. That is the Academy of Science here in Berlin, and they have a part that is collecting ancient Roman inscriptions all over Europe since 1860. Yeah, and they want the public to take photographs of all these stones and things like that. Yeah, but we don't have the manpower to handle this. Yeah.
Yeah, this sounds really very amazing. I would like to ask several thousand questions, but Michelle, you still have some very interesting questions, as you said, to the point.
Yes, I agree. There's so many questions to ask to our guests. The first question received was on the link between Museum Digitale and every museum. For instance, if a museum has published a database, does this museum link its own data through the platform Museum Digitale, or do you make the link within the record of the piece of work, the piece of art?
It very much depends on the museums. So like the State Museums of Berlin, they have an own platform for their museums. And so they use Museum Digitale and have an own instance because they are so big. They are like an own federal state. So they have Museum Digitale, State Museums of Berlin, but they also have State Museums of Berlin Digital, which is their own online collection. And there we link to, from each object record, we link to the object record in their collection management system. Or in their public online collection. With the Landesmuseum Württemberg, the State Museum of Württemberg, it's the opposite, kind of, because they, on their website, they show their objects. So they have an a public online collection, but that is directly generated through the API of Museum Digitale. So they take the object information from Museum Digitale as a source. Okay, they don't link to the object record at Museum Digitale, but we don't mind. So the direction very much depends on the case.
Okay, it's done. It's so fascinating. I'm so impressed by your work. Another position of improvement is why isn't there any person indexed with direct links with to the object they would have created or they're linked to? Obviously, haven't been that through Museum Digitale, but there is no index person pointing directly to the objects. Haven't checked, to be honest.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
I think if you look up a person, it's not shown immediately which items are linked to the persons. Is this the question?
Yes, Anna.
We have a multi-purpose search string. So you can simply put the name of the person and you get all the objects about the person. And for each person, we also have a person page. And there is also a link to the search for objects created by this person. So we have it.
Yeah, and I also think when you look at an item and you check at the item the graph visualization, when you will see the graph, and the graph indicates quite clearly that there should be from each person a link to the objects. So I think this is more or less, and this is maybe a way for improvement. It seems that the user interface is not, it's a lot to offer there. No? There's a lot to find. And I think it's sometimes really not that easy to get orientated. Sometimes I really have the impression maybe Museum Digitale needs to slow down a bit and not to do everything, because this is an effect really of too much information, that you have the impression this information is not there, although it's there, but not seeable.
We do that a lot. I always get criticized for building new functions and then hiding them so much that nobody knows them. Exactly that for. I think there's a thing that's very specific to art history, which is that art historians like to put an object name, I don't know, artist title, that artist column title. And if you have a Museum Digitale, should also work for stones at a mineralogist, I can't pronounce that, collection. So they, of course, don't have an artist at all. So they have a very different focus. And that's why with an art history collection, it would even make sense to move the artist very much to the top of the page. If you look at it from a general museum perspective, it's pretty much at the bottom and it's quite prominent, but yeah, it's not as important as it would be with an arts collection.
Yes, the more you give, the more you are asked. And there is, do you have more questions, Anna? Because you were very active in the chat.
Yeah, a very quick question, but time is really running. I wonder regarding the time concept, because time as an archaeologist is for me really very, very interesting always. And I clearly can guess what a kind of problem this is, because archaeologists send often something like Mesolithic or Neolithic. A Neolithic in the Levantine or c'est-à-dire Israel et Allemagne, these are different things. No, these are really thousands of years. So I wonder if you are linked to time concepts, maybe as there are some in the Getty AAT, and we also have Periodo. And there's a Time Gazetteer at the German Archaeological Institute with several of this kind of stuff. So you also mentioned this Chinese epoch. This is really very Chinese epoch. So do you have a concept for this too, to have authority files embedded and to get this in a more smooth way?
No, we are generalists, and luckily, in this early days in 2009, this original working group, most of the museum directors taking part in it were archaeologists, and they agreed that Stone Age is not an age. It is not a time, because time moves. If you have these geostratigraphical times like Cambrium or Devon, they are every year the International Council of Stratigraphers comes together and decides now it has to be 500 years, a million years earlier, the beginning of a period. Yeah, so you have to change it every now and then. Yeah, our solution is to put this as keywords. And then from there, we link keywords to periodo. So the Neolithic for us is a keyword, and that is linked to periodo. But the time which the museum is really meaning, or where the object was produced or found, produced, the years, they should give as numbers. Because next year, or another group of archaeologists, they put Neolithic with different years. And this way we are safe. Yeah.
Don't forget the Egyptologists, the Egyptian studies people. They have a problem because everything is dated. I don't know what the source is, but everything is dated to a source. And that means that all the reigns, all the periods are 2 years to the front or to the back. And everybody agrees that it's either 2225 until so-and-so, or 2223. And then the whole dynasty range moves with those 2 years. And nobody knows which one of it is. So, yeah, even if people agree, maybe they don't actually agree.
I think this is interesting for French people too, because if you look up the POP platform, I already post a link, it is really hard to find objects according to the period, as there you can find a lot datings, especially in the Yoconne. Yoconne is the data platform within the platform regarding all the objects from art history. And there you find a lot of dating like first half of the 19th century. And then you have mid of the 19th century. So this is pretty hard for an outsider to use this. And that's why I tackled a bit this time concepts here also for French people, as this could be an improvement for French databases too.
Yeah, we always try to translate into numbers, and the numbers we then translate automatically in different way of writing them. So the Chinese, they would write 1745 to 1750 in a very different way than we do. So, or even the Japanese, they turn it around. Yeah.
Well, I hope we have answered all the questions, because we are now entering extra time. So if everybody is satisfied, I would like to thank you again and again, Stefan and Joshua, because I was so interested by your presentation. I'm so admirative of your great work on the Muséum Digital. And I'm going to now switch back to French to thank you in French and introduce the next session. Donc, je vous remercie énormément, Joshua et Stéphane, d'avoir fait cette présentation aussi complète et pour votre travail sur la plateforme. Merci à tous et à toutes pour votre présence et votre participation. La prochaine séance du séminaire aura lieu le 11 avril 2022. La séance portera sur le projet Slave Voyages et Repairs, je ne sais pas comment ça se dit, la question des données sur l'esclavage au 19e siècle. Nous recevrons Marcy Alexander, Ian Burr de Emory Center for Digital Scholarship, Myriam Cotias du laboratoire caribéen de sciences sociales et David Eltis du Emory College of Arts and Science. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Vielen Dank. Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Vielen Dank. Wiedersehen.
Ja.